So welcome to lesson 6 of this series, and we will be talking about the evolution of procurement as a function. And I will take a global approach and a local approach when talking about this. Let me change this color first. I don't like it. Yes, something brighter. When we want to see the changes that evolution or the changes that procurement has gone through, I want you to see it in terms of the context in which procurement was placed in and the importance which was given. The context was either tactical or operational. In other words, nini kazi ya mkono, just not important. Then it moved to a strategic function. If you were to look at it locally, I'll give you just the basis of how far it has come from. We had the informal era. This was the colonial and post-colonial era. Then you go to the accounting era. Then you go to the operational era. Then you go to the strategic era. This was also called the purchasing era. And what it means is, during the informal era, there was no function as procurement, as it were. It was basically acquisitions. And any person who had the responsibility of, for example, production or marketing or whatever, was responsible for their functions. In other words, they were given the budget and they do whatever they pleased with that budget. They were not trained in procurement. They were not procurement professionals, but the functions which they were responsible for, they were also responsible for the acquisition functions of it. That is what I mean by the informal era. So if I was the head of HR department, I was also head of the procurement department, as it were, for that department. I would buy for that department. Now, fast forward a few years later, we get to the accounting era. And in the accounting era, it was noted that there was a lot of misappropriation of funds when procurement was treated informally. In other words, it was assumed that these people will be responsible enough to make sure that the needs are there. That's the first thing. The second thing is, it was assumed that the overheads would be kept down when you decentralize the procurement function, but that was not the case. This decentralization of functions created more problems than benefits. So, when they were moving towards centralization or specialization of the procurement function, it did not go directly to the purchasing function over here. It started with the accounting era. And in the accounting era, the person responsible for purchasing and procurement of organizations' items was the accounting department. And this was even pre-procurement act, pre any disposals act that was given. Everything used to happen under the accounting department. Now, when we moved to the operation or the purchasing department, this is where it was felt that it is important to have a special department for purchasing, operationally speaking, but this function was still a sub-department within the accounting department. It was not an independent department, as it were. It was a subsection under the accounting department. Now, once they noted the benefits that can come with treating purchasing as a strategic function, you can go back to that video. That's when we had the strategic era where procurement or supply chain or whatever it is that we're talking about was given autonomy. In other words, the whole responsibility of materials acquisition for any organization was handled by an independent department that was called supply chain or procurement. whatever it was, but it was an independent department. In this section, you would find purchasing people did not have a seat in top management discussions, only the accounting manager. But in this section, you will find the procurement people are represented in most Senate meetings, executive meetings, and top management meetings. It is a must the procurement head and the procurement secretary be there. So it has moved all the way from informal to formal because of those issues which I raised. Now, if we look at it from a global perspective, I want you to think of it this way. Globally, we've gone through two key eras. You have the Agrarian Era, which was mainly agricultural. Then you have the Industrial Era, which is mainly evidenced by the Industrial Revolution or mechanization of tasks. Then you have the Technology Era, which is 2000, post-2000 era, but it's not very, the changes are not as concise as the ones that we had in the Industrial Era. So if we start with the Agrarian Era, acquisition was basically simple. This was trade based on reciprocity. And when we're talking about trade by reciprocity, we are looking at the following. The Roman soldiers were paid in terms of salt. In other words, the most scarce element of the day was used as a mode of payment for goods or services. So when you pay the Romans in form of salt, that is big money. Okay, ignore that joke. That is big money for them. Now, when you think about the barter trade, where they would meet, I have a cow, you have grains, then we determine 1 cow is equals to 30 bags of this type of grain. That was trade by reciprocity. It was acquisition by reciprocity. It was not as formal as it were. Now, under the Industrial Era, we had several eras over here. You have the Industrial Era, and here one of the key one that changed the way we look at procurement was when railways were being built. This was the main mode of moving goods for industrial purposes, and the railways showed that the most important question to ask during that time is, do your suppliers have capacity? And this is the same question that we are asking today as procurement professionals. When we are pre-qualifying people, this idea came from this era. In other words, we are pre-qualifying you to make sure you have the technical capacity and you have the financial capacity to deliver item X, Y, Z. We also want to make sure that you can deliver item X, Y, Z within time T. That came from the railway era. Then we went to the war era, and during the war era, wars were being won by the following. The army that was able to use the scarce resources in the most optimal way. In other words, making sure that the right item is at the right place at the right time. That is the person that wins the war. And it was envisaged even by the war between Germany and Poland, why they took Poland within a week, Germany and Russia, why Germany was not able to take USSR because of logistical issues. They could not move during the snow. When you have Germany and the Allies, when the German army could not be able to move to fight on different fronts, then you have Germany again by fighting against Italy, and this is where we have chemical warfare, and Germany was the first one to introduce chlorine as a weapon of warfare, and that started the issue of innovation within logistical systems. So overall, the war era basically was a fight against the scarce resources that were with any given country. Now, from the war era, we went to the materials management era. And here, we are looking at materials in a holistic sense. We're looking at purchasing, we're looking at our inventory function, we're looking at our at our internal and external activities and trying to see how best can we be competitive. And this is when the term materials management was being used heavily by production companies. Materials management. Toyota and most Ford companies were using materials management as a way of expressing concern about the supply chain function. Now, fast forward, after the materials management era, we had the globalization era. And here, this is where the biggest changes happen. We are talking about you watching this video. Chances are high that the monitor that you bought was fabricated. Some of these components were bought in Taiwan, but they were fabricated in China and they were shipped to the USA and they were brought to you by Amazon, basically. That's globalization. In other words, a car as simple as a Toyota car has the electronic system supplied in Taiwan. It has it has the transmission system supplied in China, part of China. It has other components being supplied by other countries before it gets to you in Africa. Globalization. So it was basically seeing the whole system in a holistic sense. Okay, that's weird. It basically looks at your procurement function as a whole, the combination of your internal aspects and the global aspects of it. How can you be more competitive? And that is why you'd find that as Trump is campaigning, he's talking about bringing businesses back to America. The reason is you have American farms that went to China because it was cheaper to produce in China. You have other farms that are going to India because it is cheaper to produce in India in terms of labor input. That's the globalization era. Then we had the integrated supply chain era, and this we did talk about, and it has to do with integrating your whole supply chain, as it were, backward section and forward section. So I hope the video is clear. If you have any question, please you can send it to me through my email. Thank you very much.